In the heart of Chicago, where success is measured in numbers and compassion often gets lost in the noise of ambition, one man's empire was collapsing. Ethan Harrison, a brilliant yet weary CEO, stood at the edge of ruin. His once celebrated company, Harrison Dynamics, was sinking fast, its people broken, its purpose forgotten. But destiny has a strange way of rewriting stories. In his darkest hour, Ethan took a drive that would change everything, a drive back to the streets where his dreams began. There, among cracked sidewalks and flickering gas station lights, he found the one person he had long forgotten, his childhood friend Daniel Brooks, a man with nothing left but kindness, honesty, and an unshakable belief in doing good. What began as a desperate encounter soon became a rebirth, not just of a company, but of two souls. As one man rediscovered the meaning of leadership, the other proved that even the simplest heart can reignite an empire. This is not just a story about business. It's a story about friendship, redemption, and the power of believing in people when the world had stopped believing in you. In the heart of Chicago's financial district, where skyscrapers shimmered against the skyline and ambition was the air everyone breathed, Ethan Harrison sat alone in his luxurious office on the top floor of Harrison Dynamics. The room that once symbolized victory now felt like a glass cage. His company, his life's work, was on the brink of collapse. Stacks of financial reports lay scattered across the mahogany desk, each one a silent reminder of failure. Numbers written in red ink screamed louder than words, telling him that bankruptcy wasn't a possibility anymore. It was a countdown. Outside the office door, employees whispered nervously about layoffs, unpaid bonuses, and shrinking client lists. Harrison Dynamics had once been one of the fastest-growing tech manufacturing firms in the Midwest, supplying innovative components to some of the biggest names in the industry. But now those same clients had turned away, choosing younger competitors with fresher ideas. Ethan's once proud empire had become a sinking ship, and he couldn't find a way to stop the water from rushing in. He had worked day and night, sacrificing sleep, friendships, and even love for this company. But sitting in that silent office, he couldn't help but wonder, where had he gone wrong? The more he tried to fix things, the worse they seemed to get. His board members were furious. Investors were threatening lawsuits. The newspapers had already started running stories with headlines like "Harrison Dynamics, From Glory to Dust." Every morning he woke up with a new storm waiting to swallow him whole. That evening, the city lights twinkled outside his office like mocking stars. Ethan sat by the window watching people on the street, rushing home to their families. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt peace, the last time he had smiled without a reason tied to money or success. The weight of his failures pressed against his chest, making it hard to breathe. In desperation, he grabbed his car keys, deciding to drive without a destination, just to escape the suffocating walls that reminded him of defeat. Hours later, his silver Mercedes rolled into a quieter part of Detroit, miles away from the glitter of Chicago's skyline. It was his childhood neighborhood, a place he hadn't visited in over 20 years. The streets were cracked, the houses old, yet there was something comforting about it. The familiar corners whispered memories of simpler times, of two boys running through alleys, dreaming about building something great one day. He stopped at a small gas station, more out of habit than need. As he stepped out to stretch his legs, his eyes fell on a man sweeping the ground near the pumps. His jacket was torn at the sleeves, his shoes covered in dust, but his posture was steady. When he looked up, Ethan froze. That face, aged but unmistakable, belonged to his childhood friend, Daniel Brooks. For a long moment, Ethan couldn't speak. Memories of shared lunches, laughter, and dreams flooded his mind. Daniel had been the one who believed in him when no one else did. In school, when Ethan couldn't afford lunch, Daniel would quietly slide his sandwich across the table. When bullies mocked Ethan's worn-out shoes, Daniel stood beside him, unafraid. Now, seeing him like this, tired, underpaid, and surviving on scraps, felt like a punch to the heart. "Daniel," Ethan finally said, his voice uncertain, almost trembling. The man looked up again, and recognition flickered across his face. "Ethan Harrison," he said with a small, amused smile. "The big CEO himself." His tone was teasing, but his eyes carried warmth, not resentment. Ethan walked closer, unable to hide his shock. They shook hands, though Ethan felt a pang of guilt, realizing how soft his palms were compared to Daniel's rough, calloused ones. They decided to sit on the curb outside the gas station, like they used to as kids when they'd dream about the future. The night was cold, but their conversation was warm. Daniel told him about his life, how he had lost his father early, how college became a dream too expensive to chase, how he'd bounced from one low-paying job to another. Yet through all the hardship, he hadn't lost his humor or his kindness. Ethan listened, realizing how much he had forgotten about the world beyond his glass office. Daniel spoke of simple joys, helping neighbors, feeding stray dogs, fixing old radios. He didn't complain about life, he simply accepted it. Ethan, on the other hand, felt small. He had everything Daniel once wanted, and yet he was miserable. The irony stung. At one point, Daniel laughed softly and said, "You remember what I used to tell you? You'll do great things one day, Ethan. And you did. Look at you." His voice was sincere, but Ethan felt a lump in his throat. "Do I really do great things?" he wondered silently. He had money, fame, and power, but no peace, no friendship, and no sense of purpose. The two friends talked until the night deepened. The gas station lights flickered, and the sound of crickets filled the pauses between their words. Ethan felt something stir inside him, a realization that perhaps what he had been searching for wasn't more business strategies or corporate fixes. It was something human, something Daniel still carried effortlessly: empathy, loyalty, belief in people. When Ethan finally stood up to leave, he hesitated. "Daniel," he said quietly, "what if I told you I need your help?" Daniel laughed, thinking it was a joke. "My help? Ethan, you own a company. I barely own this broom." But Ethan's expression was serious. "No," he said softly, "you understand people. That's something I lost a long time ago." They said goodbye that night, but as Ethan drove back toward Chicago, the conversation echoed in his mind. Every word, every smile from his old friend reminded him that leadership wasn't about power or titles, it was about heart. His company had fallen not because of weak strategies, but because it had forgotten its soul. By the time he reached his penthouse, the first rays of dawn had begun to touch the horizon. He stood at his window, looking out at the waking city. For the first time in months, he felt clarity, not from logic, but from emotion. The answer to saving Harrison Dynamics wasn't buried in spreadsheets or board meetings. It was sitting on a cold Detroit curb, sweeping floors, still believing in goodness. That morning, Ethan made a decision that would change everything. He would bring Daniel back into his life, not as a symbol of pity, but as a partner in rebuilding what truly mattered. He didn't know if the board would accept it or if the world would understand, but for once he didn't care about opinions. He cared about doing what was right. As the sun rose higher, lighting up the skyline, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. For the first time, he believed that maybe, just maybe, redemption was still possible. The next morning, as dawn broke over Chicago, Ethan Harrison sat at his desk with renewed determination. The sleepless night had given him something he hadn't felt in years: clarity. The idea of bringing Daniel Brooks into Harrison Dynamics wasn't just unconventional, it was unheard of. But deep inside, Ethan believed that his old friend could restore what the company had lost, the human spirit that once made it thrive. When he called an emergency board meeting that morning, his executives gathered with skepticism painted across their faces. They had no idea the announcement they were about to hear would shake the very foundation of the company. When Ethan stood before them, the room was filled with silence. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice firm but calm, "our company doesn't have a financial problem. It has a heart problem, and I've decided to fix it differently." The executives exchanged uneasy glances. Then Ethan continued, "I've hired a new general manager, someone who understands people better than any of us." The murmurs started immediately, but Ethan raised his hand. "His name is Daniel Brooks." The room erupted in disbelief. "You're hiring a gas station worker to manage a multi-million-dollar firm?" one board member shouted. Ethan didn't flinch. "I'm hiring a man with integrity," he replied. Later that week, Daniel walked into the sleek glass building of Harrison Dynamics for the first time. Dressed modestly in a second-hand suit Ethan had insisted he wear, Daniel's nervousness was visible, but his eyes carried quiet strength. The receptionists whispered as he passed by. Some executives smirked, others avoided eye contact. They couldn't understand what Ethan saw in him. But Daniel didn't care about the stares. He was there for a purpose. As he stood in front of the employees for the first time, he said simply, "I may not know how to run a company, but I do know how to listen." True to his word, Daniel began his first days not behind a desk, but among the people. He visited the factory floors, shared coffee with engineers, ate lunch with janitors, and spoke to the marketing teams about their frustrations. No notebook, no presentations, just conversations. He listened to their stories, workers who hadn't received raises in years, departments burdened by unrealistic deadlines, and managers who ruled through fear. Daniel didn't promise miracles, he promised understanding. Slowly, people began to see him not as an outsider, but as someone who genuinely cared. Within weeks, the atmosphere started to shift. Daniel introduced small changes that seemed insignificant at first: weekly team lunches, open-door meetings, and anonymous suggestion boxes. He even created a new Employee Ideas program, where every worker could propose innovations directly to the management team. Ethan watched in quiet awe as morale began to rise. The same employees who once dragged their feet to work now stayed late voluntarily, driven by a sense of belonging. The company's heartbeat was returning, one act of kindness at a time. Meanwhile, Daniel faced ridicule from higher executives who believed his methods were naive. "This isn't a charity," one of them sneered during a meeting. Daniel looked calmly at him and said, "No, but it should still have a soul." His words struck something deep in Ethan, who had been sitting silently beside him. For the first time, Ethan realized how far he had drifted from the values he once believed in. He had built an empire, yes, but one without warmth. Now, watching Daniel speak with such humility and conviction, he knew the company was finally in good hands. By the third month, tangible results began to appear. Employee productivity increased by nearly 30%, customer satisfaction doubled, and clients who had previously cut ties began to return. Daniel's emphasis on communication and respect spread through every department. He didn't fire people to save costs. He trained them. He didn't demand loyalty, he earned it. And Ethan, once buried in spreadsheets, now spent his days walking through the same factory floors, greeting employees by name. He was learning again, this time not as a boss, but as a leader. One afternoon, as they stood overlooking the manufacturing floor, Ethan turned to Daniel and said, "You've done something I couldn't. Make them believe again." Daniel smiled and shook his head. "You just forgot what believing looked like," he said gently. Those words stayed with Ethan for days. The truth was simple yet profound. He had been so busy building success that he had forgotten to build trust. Daniel had reminded him that a company was more than numbers. It was people breathing life into a dream. As the months turned into a year, Harrison Dynamics underwent a transformation that stunned the business world. Media outlets ran stories with headlines like "The Miracle at Harrison Dynamics" and "From Losses to Legacy, the Friendship that Saved a Company." Investors who once doubted Ethan's sanity now praised his decision as visionary. But Ethan knew the real credit didn't belong to him. It belonged to the man who had swept a gas station floor with dignity and now swept away the dust of greed from an empire. During the company's annual general meeting, Ethan took the stage with Daniel beside him. The auditorium was packed, employees, partners, and media alike waiting to hear how the company had turned around. Ethan took a deep breath and began. "A year ago, this company was dying, not because of competition, but because of arrogance. I thought success was measured in profit margins. Then I met a man who reminded me that true success lies in people." He turned to Daniel, who stood humbly with his hands folded. "This man taught me what leadership truly means." The room erupted in applause, but Daniel simply smiled, almost embarrassed by the attention. When it was his turn to speak, he said softly, "I'm not a businessman. I'm just someone who believes that people work best when they're treated with respect. What we did here wasn't magic, it was trust." His words trembled slightly as he added, "Ethan gave me a chance when I had nothing, and I just did what I've always believed. Do good, and it will come back." After the meeting, employees lined up to shake Daniel's hand. Some of them had tears in their eyes. They weren't just celebrating the company's success, they were celebrating a culture of compassion that had been reborn. Even the executives who once mocked him now looked at him with admiration. Ethan watched the scene unfold and felt something rare, a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The boy who once dreamed with Daniel under Detroit's dim streetlights had come full circle. That evening, as the sun set over the Chicago skyline, Ethan and Daniel stood on the rooftop of the company building, looking out at the glowing city. The air was cool, the sky painted in hues of orange and gold. "You saved us," Ethan said quietly. Daniel chuckled. "No, Ethan, you just remembered who you were." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of years and struggle melting away. Below them, lights from the building flickered, each one a symbol of hope restored. In the months that followed, Harrison Dynamics not only prospered, but also became a model for ethical business practices across the United States. Other companies began studying their approach, realizing that empathy wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Daniel turned down interviews and awards, preferring to stay in the background, guiding quietly. Ethan, now a different man, often told his employees, "We rise by lifting others." It became the company's new motto, etched into every wall and every heart. And so the friendship that began in the dusty streets of Detroit became the heartbeat of a corporate revival that inspired the nation. Two men, one who lost his way and one who never stopped believing, proved that no company is ever truly doomed as long as it remembers its soul. Harrison Dynamics had risen again, not through money or power, but through kindness, loyalty, and the courage to believe in second chances.